Welcome to People and Profit. This week we're looking at the challenges facing the global economy in 2018. Coming up, as President Xi Jinping consolidates his power at home, will this be China's year to take a global lead in politics and business? What are the risks of a cyber attack creating a major market shock? Plus, Iran, NAFTA and protectionism. There's lots on the US president's plate, but should the business world be worried about Donald Trump? Well, businesses are facing into this year on a positive note. Stock markets remain close to record highs and the global economy looks set to continue growing steadily. But as always, the worlds of politics and economics are intrinsically linked, and a major political event could spark a market panic. This week, we're looking at the top risks facing the world in 2018, according to research from the Eurasia Group. They identified China's rising geopolitical and economic influence and an accidental overreaction to something like a cyber attack or North Korean posturing as key issues to watch this year. That's as well as a global technology Cold War, elections in Mexico and deteriorating US-Iranian relations. On top of that, the report also identifies concerns over protectionism, Brexit and instability in Africa. For more on all of this, let's go to New York and speak to Ian Bremmer, who's president of Eurasia Group. Ian, thanks for being with us. China is one of the big concerns listed in your report this year. You say they're setting international standards in a whole range of areas. What should the business world be worried about there?
Well, they should worry about the fact that standards are increasingly going to be set not by Washington, but in much of the world by Beijing. And as you know, the Chinese are not moving towards democracy, and they're not moving towards a private sector-driven free market. They're still very much a state capitalist authoritarian regime. So for those that were thinking that it was Western-led globalization and free markets, we don't have a global free market anymore. We have a hybrid economy. And if the Chinese are saying the Americans don't want to lead, we'll write checks, we'll promote global trade, we'll take leadership in the Paris Accord, that means that corporations are going to have a harder time assessing their plans, that efficiency is going to be reduced, and that the piper that needs to be paid is going to be in Beijing. That's a tough piper for a lot of companies.
Is that really going to make a big difference for a lot of companies? Is it going to be that easy for China to change the rules quickly?
Well, they're doing it in China, of course, and so a lot of companies, I mean, if you're Facebook, it makes a big difference. You want to be a dominant global corporation. Not only do you have now major competitors that are in China being supported by the state, but you as Facebook don't even have access to China. So it's already been a game changer for China itself. What this means is that other countries around the world, obviously those in Asia, many in Latin America, many in Sub-Saharan Africa, and even some in Europe, are increasingly hedging more towards Beijing than they are towards Washington. I found it quite instructive when I was in Vietnam for the APEC summit just 2 months ago that, you know, Trump was there and he gave his speech, but people weren't paying nearly as much attention to what the American president was saying as what the Chinese president was saying, because they thought there was real money and real policy impact for them behind that. That obviously matters for corporations around the world. It's a pretty critical point, and that's why it's risk number one.
You mentioned in your report the Chinese investment in artificial intelligence. Why is that in particular something that we should worry about?
Well, because it's the government, right? I mean, so the United States, of course, is also investing a lot in artificial intelligence, but it's American corporations. It's Google and it's Facebook and it's Elon Musk, right? And Microsoft. But those are companies that they're not patriotic. They're American in the sense that they're based in the United States, though Amazon's thinking about putting its second headquarters in Canada. That would be very different. If you're China and you're investing in AI, that is corporations with the government. And that means that the alignment, not only of what people see, but what's driving economic growth is coming from that government. And that, of course, changes the way we think about the market. I mean, Vladimir Putin and Elon Musk don't agree on much, but they both said a couple months ago that whoever dominates AI is going to dominate the world. Well, you know, I got to tell you, there are really two choices between in who's going to win. One happens to be the Chinese, the other happens to be Silicon Valley. And depending on whether it's the public or the private sector, that's going to determine a lot about the future of the entire world order. I think there's probably no more important question out there over the next 10 to 20 years than that one. It's more important than climate change or global inequality. I think this is going to be the biggest thing that needs to be determined in what kind of a world we're going to live in.
And part of the element of that is this idea of countries closing off parts of technology or internet or making them more national interest. You talk about that in your report as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's no question that we're heading towards a world that if the markets are more fragmented, it's going to be more protectionist. And some of that will be traditional tariffs, like we see between the United States and China coming. But some of it will be non-tariff, support, where, you know, you're providing access and subsidy to your own companies behind borders, and that's seen as an unfair advantage.
How much of a role has Donald Trump had in this shift towards China, this shift away from that US-driven global order?
Well, you know, there are those in the foreign policy establishment that really believe that the geopolitical recession we have right now, the abdication of U.S. leadership, is all about Trump. That it wasn't Obama, it wasn't Bush, it wasn't anything else. And so therefore, if you get rid of Trump, you can reset. I don't believe that at all. I think that American presidents are comparatively weak. Trump is a weak president, even as presidents go. Certainly, Trump's America First policy has made it easier for the Chinese to play a greater leadership role, but the world was already moving in that direction. I mean, think about the relationship that Obama had in the region, his inability to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership done, even though it got started under his administration. Think about what happened to American leadership after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and how many people were less willing to support it. Think about your continent and the weakness of the transatlantic relationship, the Brexit vote that happened before the American elections. I mean, I think the move towards a post-Pax Americana world has been coming for many years now.
So if President Trump's not too much of a factor then, but you do list what you're calling accidents in your report, and one of the potential accidents could be around North Korea, and that's probably quite likely to involve Donald Trump.
That's right. I think to the extent that Trump is a factor, he's much more of a factor in miscalculations. I mean, he has a solid national security team around him, Mattis, McMaster, Tillerson, others. But it's not clear that they're going to be there for the duration of the Trump administration. And it's also not clear they're always listened to. So the ability of the United States in a world that's much more volatile to miscalculate, creating policies that others, rogue states, rogue actors, whether it's terrorist organizations and cyber criminals or it's governments like you see in North Korea and Iran, certainly that means that the geopolitical environment has become much more dangerous. And if the Americans aren't going to play an active leadership role, you know, you really have two choices, right? You can either fix it or things are going to break. And I don't think anyone looking at 2018 sees the geopolitical order and says, oh, we're going to fix it. No one thinks we're going to fix it. So things are going to start breaking, and we're going to start seeing more crises that'll be much more impactful for a lot of people around the world. We were fortunate not having those in 2017, but I'm not going to sit here and talk to you and think that that's sustainable. I really don't think it is.
You've also looked at the issue of a potential cyber attack causing a major shock on the markets or politically. Tell us about how likely you think that is.
Well, you know, when I talk to serious experts about things like North Korea and Iran and Russia and the headlines about how things could go really badly, you know, they spend time talking about why it's not actually that bad. When I talk to the serious experts on cyber, those that spend their entire lives thinking nothing about what can go wrong and the state of play of that technology and the politics that informs it, they're a lot more worried than the headlines suggest. They think that these technologies are advancing very quickly and uncontrollably, that there aren't effective defenses to guard against them, that bad actors are very close in their technological sophistication to those of the United States and the Europeans and the Japanese, and that the likelihood of much more calamitous attacks on critical infrastructure, for example, things that would delegitimize institutions that we believe believe in and respect is quite real. And so I do think that the likelihood of greater dislocations, economic dislocations, coming as a consequence of cyber, not just from, say, the North Koreans trying to steal some money to evade sanctions, but from bad actors outside of the state system that we have very little capacity to deter, dissuade, that those risks are going up quite a bit.
Something that perhaps we don't talk about in the headlines as much. You do see some risk to African economic growth from a result of instability there.
Well, yeah, I do. And I think that, a lot of people, a lot of professionals looking at Africa have talked about how this is Africa's decade and they're finally doing better. And there's no question that there are a lot of people in urban centers in Africa that because of smartphones, because of internet banking are able to become consumers, and that's been great for them. But we also see that governance across sub-Saharan Africa is very bad, and that's even true in the most important economies in South Africa, in Nigeria. It's fallen off a bit in Kenya, and that means there's no infrastructure that's being built fast enough to accommodate a rapidly growing youth population, and the interest in the Americans in providing security is less than it used to be. The Chinese are there big time economically, but not in a meaningful way diplomatically or militarily, and no one else is going to really move the needle there. I think that, to the extent that anyone in Europe is making a difference, it's absolutely French and the Macron government, and that's a positive thing, but it doesn't supplant the historic role of early colonial powers or the United States. And so that means probably more forced migrations, weaker borders, weaker governance. More extreme climate conditions also hurt sub-Saharan Africa more than anybody else. You put it all together, and it means not that the continent is going to hell, but that the upside that I think a lot of the big consulting firms had been hoping for just isn't coming to fruition.
OK, Ian Bremmer, President of Eurasia Group, thank you very much for speaking to us from New York.
My pleasure, guys.
Well, that's it from us for now. If you'd like to get in touch with any thoughts on the programme, you can do so on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.